Good afternoon. Welcome to the weekly livestock market update. I'm Brownfield Anchor reporter Meghan Grebner with us as always to talk all things markets. University of Missouri's Scott Brown. Good afternoon, Scott.
Happy Friday, Megan.
Happy Friday to you. We're going to talk a little retail prices today. We're going to talk some consumer sentiment, but I think the big story of the week is probably supply and demand numbers. I think interesting numbers with those coming out today, at least on the input side of things. But before we get into all that, let's recap what happened this week in the markets.
Yeah, on cattle this week, Megan, those live fed cattle were basically unchanged on the week. On the feeder cattle side, we were pretty much steady, but some $3 higher feeder cattle prices this week. Futures prices on the cattle side were higher this week. The June live cattle futures contract was up a little more than $2.40, and the August feeder contract was up about $7.25. We did shave 14 cents off the July corn futures this week, I think helpful to feeder cattle prices. On the beef side, the choice box beef price was down $2.40. That was really led by what were some lower ribs this week. On the hog side, cash barrels and gilts about 75 cents higher on the week. We also got a little increase in the June lean hog futures contract. It was up nearly 60 cents this week. The pork cutout value also gained up $1.65. That was really led by primarily strength in those ham prices this week.
Let's talk weekly slaughter numbers as we take a look back at this week. How are we compared to the previous week and then also year ago levels?
Yeah, according to USDA for the week ending May 13th, the run of 646,000 head of cattle. That's actually up 23,000 from where we were a week ago, but down 5,000 from where we were a year ago at this time. On the hog side, a run of 2.375 million head of hogs this week. That's down 72,000 head from last week, but 12,000 head above where we were a year ago.
As we talk about that percentage year over year, how are we looking for cattle and hog slaughter comparatively?
Yeah, on the cattle side, we're actually down 3.1% year to date. And on the hog side of the equation, we're up 1.5%.
Do we anticipate knowing what's been happening in the last year on the cattle side, that 3.1% to get even bigger?
Absolutely. And you just have to look at the WASDE report and USDA's first estimate for 2024 beef production to remind yourself that we're got a ways to go in terms of tightening cattle supplies. So probably we're going to talk about that growing as we get further in the year. Although when you look at the last few weeks, we've actually shrunk that a couple of tenths of a percentage point at least.
Big reports this week, both on the consumer side of things and then also on supply and demand. Before we get into those supply and demand numbers, I want to talk retail prices and consumer sentiment back to back, if that's okay, just to kind of keep that consumer element together. As we take a look at retail price numbers, talk to me about what's going on with beef prices at the grocery store and then pork prices as well.
Yeah, on the beef side, the choice retail beef price for April came in at $7.85 this week. That actually is 2.8% above where it was for March of this year, and 1.5% above where it was last year. Now, a little mix here in that when you look at the ground beef price, $4.79 a pound, according to the April numbers, that was actually down 0.5% relative to where we were in March, where steak prices were 3.1% higher relative to where we were last month. So we are seeing some differences in those cuts. On the pork side of the equation, $4.73 retail pork price for April. That's 3.9% above where we were last month. Your favorite bacon prices, $6.55, according to the data released for April. That's down 1% from where we were last month. Just to keep it in perspective, when you look at the choice retail beef price or the pork retail price, we're still talking about those being 25% above where they were April of 2019. So pre-COVID, if you will. So much higher levels, although I think we've slowed at least maybe some of the rapid increase we saw in the early part of the COVID years, at least.
So I'm going to throw in Proposition 12 ruling came down and was released this week from the Supreme Court. As we take a look at that, so just some background for those who may not know, it sets very strict requirements for pork that's sold in California. So thinking about California as a state, a very large consumer of pork products, but not a very large producer, which means they kind of potentially could set precedent for the way pork is raised in other states that has to go in to be sold there. How does that potentially impact the retail side of prices for pork for a protein that's already been and is already running 25% above where it was pre-COVID just 4 years ago?
Yeah, so I think for those living in California, very clearly, we're going to talk about higher retail pork prices as the cost of the Prop 12 regulations are higher. So undoubtedly they're higher. We can argue a lot about the exact level of those costs, but we're going to talk about higher costs to produce pork destined for the California market. Exactly how we handle that could have implications for other consumers around the country as well. So do we see more than just what's needed to go to California in what would be an expansion in terms of the space available for sows? If that's the case, then we're talking about higher cost of production and less overall production in the country. So we know we're raising cost. Who bears that cost? I think all depends on, are we just going to talk about meeting what we need for California, and can we segregate that product in a way that meets Prop 12? I think those are some of the things that'll be worked out in the coming months.
Do we also have to take into consideration the additional costs to sort, separate, and those supply chain elements to get that product pulled from a traditional, from farm gate to plate, to get there? Does that come into play as well?
Absolutely, Megan. So it's not just costs at the farm level that we're going to have to talk about. So if you think about, how am I going to operate a plant that needs to separate, segregate product going to California? Do I run that plant one day a week, slaughtering hogs that are destined for California, and otherwise for the rest of the country the rest of the week? How do I do that? That has costs associated with it as well. So all of that, I think, will give us higher consumer prices at the end of the day. I'm not ready to speculate how much higher, but certainly I think consumers will notice it.
And we're not just talking Prop 12. I mean, that's the one that's kind of getting all the attention, obviously, because of the Supreme Court ruling. But there's one in Massachusetts, correct? I can't remember what its number or its name is offhand, but that one's has even stricter parameters. How does this set precedent to pork production potentially in the U.S. moving forward, and kind of the way the industry looks?
Yes. So the way we've traditionally produced pork, and I always look at it this way: we're trying to produce it as efficiently as we can. That changes as we put regulations in place. And so more and more, we're going to talk about consumers ultimately bearing the cost here. What do they pay for pork? At the end of the day, we probably, all else equal, produce less pork than we otherwise would have without these regulations in place, because producers are going to need higher prices at the end of the day to offset some of the additional costs that they are going to bear. So consumers at the end of the day are the ones that are going to pay, and if that's what consumers want, is product that's raised differently than the way we've traditionally done it, as long as they're willing to bear the cost, we'll change the way we produce pork in this country.
All right, let's talk consumer sentiment to keep with that consumer feel and conversation as we take a look at those May 2023 numbers. Not necessarily a bright, shiny report for this month.
I didn't like what I saw in the report on consumer sentiment. So you look at the May numbers, index came in at 57.7. That is just down 9.1% from where we were last month. So we've certainly seen a setback, and I think this has a lot to do with just current economic conditions. When you look at consumer expectations, they were down 11.7% month over month. I worry that doesn't bode well. So perhaps higher interest rates, higher prices, all are getting consumers' attention at this point in time. And if that continues, then what happens to meat demand, I think, certainly a little worrisome as we go through the remainder of this year.
Scott, as we wrap up today, supply and demand numbers out earlier. Talk to me a little bit. Let's talk livestock numbers, but then I also want to talk inputs as well, because I think that is an interesting perspective.
Yeah, so number one, USDA gave us 2024 calendar projections for the first time with the May WASDE release today. But when you look at what they're doing in the 2023 estimates, two things to me really stuck out in the report. Number one, fed cattle prices were increased to $1.70 relative to what their projections were in April. So that now puts them at a $1.66.5. The other one on the other side of the equation, so barrel and gilt prices, they reduced $4.50 for their 2023 projection. So now instead of 61, they're at 56.50 on those barrel and gilt prices. So as we see current hog prices going lower, USDA certainly adjusted to that. I guess as I look at 2024, a few things stick out on the production side worth talking about. So USDA estimates beef production in 2024 at 24.8 billion pounds. That compares to their current projection for 2023 of 26.9, or rounds to 27 billion pounds. So another 2 billion pound cut. I shouldn't say another, we don't quite have that for 2023, but back-to-back years of large declines in beef production certainly ought to get folks' attention. On the hog side, they basically say flat pork production from 2023 to 2024. So to get higher hog prices, we're going to have to talk about some stronger demand than we've seen of late, at least.
Let's talk inputs real quick. As you take a look at 2023 corn price estimate and some production guesses, how are those stacking up?
Yeah, so this might be the good news for us as livestock producers, not good news if you're in the corn and soybean business, but USDA is projecting $4.80 a bushel corn price for what we harvest this fall. That compares to what is a $6.60 for the current year that we're in. So lower corn prices. They also are suggesting lower soybean meal prices in 2023-24. They're estimating $365 a ton. That compares to their current estimate for 22-23 of $455 a ton. So that may be the silver lining for especially hog producers, I think, when you look ahead at 2024 and where profitability could go.
Well, that is good news. It ends a little bit of silver lining, a little bit of concern though about, at least for the cattle producers, hay stocks and how those are sitting for right now.
For sure. We continue to be focused on weather, and sitting here in mid-Missouri where we're pretty dry right now. You can look into Kansas, Oklahoma, a little bit into Texas, Nebraska, still with places of dry weather. It all matters what happens going forward in terms of rainfall. More and more, we need timely rainfall during the growing season because we don't have any reserves to really keep that grass and hay growing in front of us.
Scott, that'll do it for us this week. As you look ahead to next week, Cattle on Feed report is the only report we have. What are you watching for with those numbers?
We'll continue to be focused on just what happens to placements and how tight they get as we look ahead, and where we're kind of starting to set the stage for the second half of 2023 beef production at the end of the day.
It definitely will be interesting to watch. And typically we get livestock slaughter and cold storage somewhere around there. As those will likely come the week after, correct?
That is correct.
You know what we always look for in there right now, which is those beef cow slaughter numbers. I guess we'll have to wait an extra week for those.
That's right. We don't get to talk about it next week. We'll have to wait one more week, Megan.
Scott, great to see you. Enjoy some lovely Friday evening baseball, and we'll talk to you next Friday.
Sounds good, Megan.
So our weekly livestock market update delivered to your email box every Saturday morning. Go to brownfieldagnews.com. You can also submit questions and comments there. And for a roundup of what happened during the day in the markets, check out John Perkins' Market Minute every afternoon. Have a great weekend. I'm Meghan Grebner for Brownfield.